Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm unboxing the new ROG Ally X and doing more of a generalist review of this, meaning I'm not going to pull apart the hardware and get crazy in-depth with benchmarking to see the difference between this and the original ROG Ally. I'm going to let other channels like ETA Prime, Dave 2D, and Linus Tech Tip do those. If you don't want to watch those though, the really quick summary here is that the hardware has been rearranged to make room for the new 80 watt-hour battery, along with changing out the original fan to a more efficient one, and then reorganizing the inputs at the top to put the micro SD card reader in a better spot so it doesn't have the same overheating issues that the original Ally had. In terms of performance, it's going to be really hard to get a direct comparison between these two just because you're looking at what the settings that the reviewer or the benchmarker is using. And then on top of that, one, they have to be identical. Is it the most optimal in terms of those settings? What are they using in the Adrenaline software? Because we've gotten a lot of updates to that has made performance even better on both of these devices. There's just so many variables here to make it, hey, this is a 100% direct comparison between these two. In general, when we're just looking at this in a general sense, because we do have more RAM with this device, I've seen anywhere from 0 to somewhere in the range of 6 to 8, maybe even 10 FPS increase, just dependent upon the game, and again, all of those various settings. So there is an increase in performance. It's not massive, it's very subtle here. It's something that if you had the original ROG Ally and you pick this up, you're probably not really going to notice much of a difference, because even if we're looking at a handful of FPS increase here, it's not something where it's a massive leap where you would be like, holy smokes, I went from 60 FPS all the way up to 120. That's not going to be the case here, but we do still get a performance increase, which is nice. What I will say is spend a lot of time going through the Adrenaline software, the in-game settings, and then the various power modes with this, and find the right sweet spot here, because we do have this larger battery. So one of the cool things with this, and I think it's the main upside here, is that you can play this a lot longer than the original, especially if you are using those more power hungry modes. If we're going to bump this up to 27 watts, you can play at that watt output much longer than you could on the original. The question there then becomes though, can you get almost the exact same performance at a lower watt output and then just extend your playtime by a lot? We are talking about double the battery size here. So in that, you should be getting double the amount of playtime. So dependent upon the watts that you may be using in the game, if you were previously getting roughly an hour and a half of playtime, let's say, you should be getting double that. Now for me personally, I usually play Destiny 2 on this. The watts that I usually use are 25. I want the increase in performance when it comes to that game. Every now and then, yes, I click it down to 15, but in general, I average about an hour 15, hour and a half at the 25 watts. ROG has tweaked these presets though. So the previous 10, 15, 25 is now 13, 17, still 25, but you can go into the Armory Crate software, do your own manual power settings here and adjust these numbers, and even hit a peak of 35 watts, although it will only sustain that for 10 seconds. But you can adjust these variables as well if you want to. When plugged in, you still get the 30 watt mode, but for me, when using the 25 watt mode playing Destiny 2, I'm getting 2.5-ish hours, maybe 2:45 of playtime. So the amount of time I get now between needing to recharge this is awesome. It feels more like a legit portable device, which I think a lot of us in our mind when these all were first launching, we were thinking about, which is like, hey, I'm going to be out there for a couple hours. I can easily play this and I won't have to worry about battery. We are now finally getting products that do offer that, which is great. Another thing to keep in mind is obviously going to be your screen brightness. When I'm talking about these numbers, usually I'm at about 50% screen brightness because I'm inside. You go outside, you need to increase the brightness. It's obviously going to drain the battery much quicker. So that's going to be my little spiel on performance. I will talk a little bit more about the spec differences here in a second, but if you want those really in-depth tests, like I said, go check out those other channels. I will actually have some linked in the description so you guys can look at those. Here, I want to cover the physical and spec differences just really quick, and then I'm going to talk more about my experience with this compared to the original and whether or not it's worth that upgrade. It's going to be dependent upon what you're looking for with this. Now, in terms of the package here, it's almost identical to the original, with the box now being black to match the color of the Ally. And personally, I like this shift here from white to black. It just looks a little bit sleeker to me. I still like the original white. I just think the black here gives it a cleaner overall look. It also makes it look slim. So as your eye is actually looking at this, it's hard to see that they actually do have a slight increase in how thick the mold is compared to the original. But because of that color, it just doesn't quite transfer to your eye, which is nice. With these both side by side from the front, you will notice that the edges on the Ally X are smoother on the bottom corners, giving it a slightly better feel in your hands. The thumbsticks now have a nice ridge for better grip and control, and the D-pad is redesigned and more usable now. The menu buttons on the side of the screen have been moved up very slightly, while the A, B, X, Y buttons have been moved down slightly. The thumbsticks and the D-pad have been pulled in a little bit closer to the screen as well, but these are all very, very subtle adjustments. Kind of hard for the eye to see, but in person you will notice these things. Shifting now to the top, this is where you will find that they've completely rearranged the layout. The only thing somewhat in the same place is the power button, which is still on the right hand side, but it has been pushed closer to the triggers. The headphone jack is now on the right hand side along with the micro SD card reader, which, fingers crossed, shouldn't have any issues with getting overheated and burned out now. In the middle, we now have a third exhaust for better airflow and heat dissipation. The volume buttons have been shifted over to the left of this to make room for the new exhaust, and the power indicator lights are now to the left of these volume buttons instead of being on the right hand side. What's made room for this is ROG ditching the PCIe input for their external GPU, and instead they went with a Thunderbolt connection. So here you now have the same USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port that can be used as a DP 1.4 port and has power delivery, but you also now have a USB 4 Gen 2 Type-C port that's Thunderbolt 4 compatible as well as DP 1.4 and has power delivery. This will give you more options when it comes to connections here, and you'll still be able to use this with an external GPU. You're just going to now have more options when it comes to that because you won't be bound by needing one that has that PCIe cable. You can use one that just has a regular Thunderbolt connection. The bumpers and triggers have been redesigned here, with the bumpers having the curve on the inside edge flipped around for better ergonomics, and the triggers have been increased in size, making them much easier to use. Shifting to the back, the main thing to point out here is that the back paddles are now smaller, and then the left air vent is actually slightly larger than the original Ally. Looking on the back, this is where you will notice that the molding here is slightly thicker, as the screws are more inset on the molding than the original Ally. For the internal components, the big changes here are now the 80-watt battery that we talked about, the new fan for better cooling, rearranging the internal layout for better cooling and to make room for that larger battery, and we also get a nice upgrade in RAM from 16 gigabytes to 24 gigabytes, and it's also faster at 7500 megahertz up from 6800 megahertz. We also get a full-size M.2 SSD this time around, so we're getting the 2280 instead of the 2230, which is basically a micro M.2 SSD. And here, instead of getting the 512 gigabytes, we get a full 1 terabyte this time around. We did get an upgrade to the speakers, which are already really good, but here I don't know how pronounced it's going to seem to everyone. I did notice a difference with an overall richer sound, especially in the bass department, but that is going to be dependent upon the person and really what their ears are picking up. These were already good to start with. They're just a little bit better here now. I do appreciate that. The screen here though is the exact same screen as on the original Ally, so no upgrade there, along with no upgrade to the CPU. Here, the ROG Ally X feels like the Steam Deck OLED, with the upgrades really giving us the more definitive version of the device and what they originally should have been. It reminds me of the old iPhone upgrades where on odd years we would get the S version of the phone, as they weren't full-fledged upgrades but small improvements to what was already there. Personally, I really like this device, and the battery is the main attraction for me as it just allows for more playtime. Add in the better ergonomics, restructured internals for better thermals, along with the 1TB full M.2 SSD, and you have one of my favorite handhelds to date. Picture quality here is still good as the screen was good to begin with, but if ROG had gone the OLED path like Steam, I think this would be a no-brainer when it comes to who wins the handheld wars. Once you change the screen though, the only thing left to upgrade would be the CPU, and then you actually just have a whole new device. So really we would get the Ally 2 at that point, so I understand why they didn't do that. Now, a subtle change here that I think was a wasted opportunity was just adding in a built-in kickstand. Now, that means more risk for a small part that potentially can break, but I'm not too sold on carrying around the cardboard kickstand they include in the box. They did give us two small versions this time around, which are literally half the size of the original, but it's still something that you have to carry around with you, where a built-in one removes the need of this altogether. So for right now, we have our S versions of these two top handhelds, with the rest of the handhelds out there trailing behind, in my opinion. But it's not just the hardware here. We also have to consider the software, and ROG has really made Armoury Crate SE one of the best handheld softwares out there, second only to Steam. To me, this is really, you have your Steam camp and then you have your Windows-based devices. Steam is running off of its own version of Linux, while most of these other devices are running off of Windows 10 or Windows 11. Here, because you have essentially these two vastly different versions, Steam is in its own ecosystem. The rest of these devices, for the most part, fall underneath, hey, they are a Windows-based device. I think out of all of those devices, when we're looking at anything from the 1X players to Legion Go, your AO Neo, your GPD Wins, all of those run off of Windows. The ROG Ally, in my opinion, just has the best software with the Armoury Crate SE. It's way easier to navigate, and then the amount of customization that you get in this, it just has that next level to it that these other ones, for the most part, are kind of lacking. They are getting better, especially Legion Go, but I just think ROG is really a step ahead of everybody right now. And it's been in this last year that we've seen this just completely change, where again, we get more customization when it comes to the different profiles that you can set for power settings, RAM. We're looking at, you can actually change the intro now as you launch Armoury Crate SE, different settings within games, all the different customization that you get inside of your kind of side menu that you can pull up. It just has improved. And again, it is the easiest one to navigate out of all of these. Layer on top of that your Adrenaline software that you get with AMD Ryzen, which is just improved over this last year as well. And now we really get to take all of the customization that we want and tweak all of these variables to see, hey, how much performance can we squeeze out of the games that we're playing, which is one of the reasons why I mentioned early on in the video, I'm not doing any benchmarking. There are so many different things that you can change in both of these software. It's a lot to test, and it's really a lot to sort through to say, hey, what is going to be the best configuration for this game? And then to show all those different testing metrics, it is just a lot to cover. So that now brings us to the big question. If you already have the ROG Ally, should you upgrade to the X? Now with this, the first thing I want to point out is the fact that there still is the non-Z1 Extreme version of the ROG Ally. That one right now is discounted down to $399, so it's $400. The X is $799, it is $800, it is double the cost. I haven't personally checked out that version of the ROG Ally. What I've seen with other reviews and just performance metrics on that version, it's not really good. It really is a thing where you should be going with the Z1 Extreme. But if you are on a much tighter budget, that does obviously have some appeal. The only thing I would caution with that is, do you really need a Windows-based device? Or if you are more interested in the Steam Deck, the original LCD version of the Steam Deck, right now it's $349, so it's $350. So for $50 cheaper, you could get a Steam Deck. Just throwing that out there in terms of things to potentially consider. But I'm going to take those out of the equation right now and really just look at the Z1 Extreme version for the original ROG Ally, which has been discounted down to $649. So basically just a $50 discount there. That $150 is what I'm really taking into consideration with the upgrades that you are getting with the ROG Ally X. So here, one of the big things to look at, we have the RAM, obviously you can't really upgrade that, but the SSD, you could upgrade that on the regular ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme processor. We're looking at the different version, the 2230 versus the 2280, but you can find those. You could bump that up to 1 terabyte. What is that going to cost you though? So when we're looking at pricing at that, it's going to potentially pull that up closer to that $800, so that $150 kind of shrinks a little bit with that. Now, the micro SD card reader on those, the new batch should have the updated configuration, so those shouldn't burn out like they were. And I've talked with ROG about that because I have one of these units and they're like, hey, we actually updated all of those. We shouldn't have any issue with the micro SD card reader now. They still are offering the larger warranty. So with these, we are getting the 2-year warranty, which is awesome. So you are covered across the board with either device. But the update there is one where, hey, you could stick with that 512 and still use that micro SD card. Here, which is cheaper, you can get one for roughly $40 to $50. Well, that's going to bring us up now to $700. So for $100, is it worth the other upgrades? Personally, I think it is. We are getting more than just an increase in RAM size and speed, but we also get better ergonomics. We get the new improved thumbsticks in terms of the grips on the outside, the better D-pad. I like the larger triggers. We're getting the better fans inside of this with that third exhaust. So overall, the accumulation of all of those things, along with we're looking at the better speakers on this, like those subtle additions that I've said makes this really the definitive version. Is it worth the $100? Personally, I think so, especially if you were going to buy the original ROG Ally Z1 Extreme. Go with this one. Don't worry about that one. If you're on a very tight budget, then yes, you can go with the non-Z1 Extreme version. But with that one, again, I would compare it to a Steam Deck and see is there something with a Steam Deck outside of the fact that it is $50 cheaper that appeals to you, and maybe even look at performance metrics just to see if the Steam Deck even outperforms the non-Z1 Extreme version of the ROG Ally. So things to consider with that one. I would put those in that separate category. If you already have the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme, if you go to sell it, some things to consider here, because then I'm not even factoring that into the price, because although this is $650 if you bought it brand new, I guarantee you there are a lot of people that are trying to sell that version so that they can upgrade. If you can find that version on Facebook Marketplace or something like that, and maybe it's like, hey, they're going to sell it for $400, then you have more to consider there. At that point, I would probably just go with that. I don't know that I'd make the upgrade if I'm on a tighter budget, but if you're not wanting to buy a used ROG Ally, then obviously taking that out of the equation, maybe you have one. If you could sell it and offset the cost, which is really what I'm doing, then that's an easy upgrade path too, because now I can take, let's say I can get $350, $400 off of selling this online, and I can put that towards this new upgrade. Is the $400 for me worth it at that point? Like, I personally love the new larger battery. That was the main draw for me, because I want to be able to take this out, not have to worry about bringing an extra backup power bank, or I have to have the charger with me. I can realistically play this for that 2.5, 3 hours and I'm good, because that's usually the situations I find myself in. So that was just such a huge draw. I'm okay with that. But this is going to be one of those things. I talk about it in all my videos. I don't like telling anybody what to do with their money. Ultimately, if you think it is worth it, you're going to do what you want. And here, I think it is better, obviously, than the Z1 Extreme if I'm going to just buy these new outright. If I have one, I'm willing to sell this one to get this new, more definitive version. I know not everybody's going to be willing to do that. And for those that are, again, on a tighter budget, you have other options with the non-Z1 Extreme version and the regular LCD Steam Deck that you potentially can consider that may be a good handheld for you. So that is going to wrap this video up. If you guys have any questions about this device, let me know in the comment section and I will make sure to answer those for you there. I will have a link for all of these devices in the description if you want to pick one of them up. And if you guys like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all of my content, hit the subscribe button. And as always, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.